So 7 of the 10 most affected countries named in this report are in Africa. What solutions is Oxfam proposing to beat hunger-linked climate change?
Thank you very much for having me, Peninah. Indeed, it's really unfortunate as we talk about the climate crisis, which is a man-made crisis, that at the moment we see it not just as a ticking time bomb, but that it's already exploding right before our eyes. As you talk about the hotspots, we've seen doubling of hunger in those countries over the last 1 year. And so as you ask around what, Oxfam is proposing, there are two sides to it in terms of what can be done on the immediate. On the immediate side, Oxfam is calling for countries, especially those from polluting nations, to step up their responsibilities and inject money in the UN humanitarian appeal, which is currently, unfortunately, really underfunded. The other thing, we are calling also on African governments to do their part in terms of investing in social protection systems that go to supporting especially the most vulnerable communities who are currently impacted by the crisis. But we see it, Peninah, as really being important, equally important, if not more so, to prevent the next crisis. And so what we are saying is that polluting countries must cut emissions. They must honor the commitments they made with the Paris Agreement. There's really no time for slacking. We must also look at how, that we tax the super polluters who are benefiting insanely in terms of profits. At the moment, as we talk, our calculations show that if 1% of the annual profits of these super polluters were considered, we would be able to have at least 10 million that is currently in terms of 10 billion US dollars in terms of funding that could very well go to the UN appeal. The other thing, as we see it, is that polluting nations need to compensate African countries for the losses and damages that they're incurring from this crisis. And they must, because they need to rebuild what they have lost in this crisis.
So
It's
Parvin,
really unfortunately, as we see it.
Parvin, allow me to just jump in right there, because you really are preempting my next question. So we're going to come back to the big polluters and how to put them into account. But there's also something else you said, that you're calling on African countries to do their bit. And so the question is, how can they lead in tackling climate change and improve food security?
Thanks, Peninah. Yeah, African countries really, there are certain things that they can do, and which we have been calling on, including through our different partners that we work with in local and national governments. African countries must and foremost get prepared. We need better climate warning systems. We need better social protection programs to help those who are most disadvantaged. Communities, when I travel around the region, you meet women who are impacted by this crisis, who repeatedly, and so they need to have better systems in place to support them. They also need to invest in small-scale farmers and build food systems that are more resilient to the climatic and economic shocks as we are seeing them. Unfortunately, climate change is on a trajectory that we cannot hold back. And so as we see repeated extreme climate shocks, we feel that it's really important that we African governments invest in social protection programs, that they look at investing in agriculture. At the moment, in terms of commitment, as per the Malabo Protocol, we had committed to 10% of the budgets being invested in agriculture, but we are not seeing that. African governments are way behind that in terms of investment.
Okay, so let's talk about then the big polluters. And I don't know what it is, unwillingness perhaps. I don't really know what it is, but they're just not committing to the pledges they've made to compensate low-income countries. So then what do you see as a way forward to ensure rich nations meet their obligations in this regard?
Thanks, Peninah. I think one of the things to highlight, and I feel, that just in the recent history, that even the polluting nations are seeing the impact of a burning world. Europe had its worst heat wave over the summer. The US drought has been the worst in centuries. So in that sense, that we really recognize, we can see the impact of climate change. But what we do recognize is that while the climate crisis, looms equally across humanity, it's not the rich nations that are feeling the most impact. It's the poorest nations, it's the least polluting nations, and in fact, the poorest communities in these countries who are facing or paying the price for this climate crisis. So we do feel that polluting nations have a moral obligation to, first of all, cut their emissions, to honor their promises, as I said earlier, on the Paris Agreement in terms of funding of the US dollars 100 billion for climate adaptation. But equally importantly, and most important, if I might insist, is really for them to pay African nations for the climate damages that they're currently they have caused. And so as we're preparing for COP27, looking at the nationally determined commitments, we really feel that it is important that the most polluting nations have a responsibility to fulfill.